the attitude, if you stand back and look at it, the attitude we have toward Muslims is they don't count.
We're dealing with them the same way that we dealt with the Indians 100 years ago, I think.
And more.
The Indians had half of North America, and gradually, one tribe after the other, it was genocide. We wiped them out. Now they're just maybe a tenth of what they once were. And it's the same thing, it appears to me, is happening now in the Muslim nations. We're hitting one Muslim nation after another, and 100 years from now, people will say, they'll be living in the American state of Iraq, and they'll say, what happened to all those Muslims that used to live here, the 200 million? And somebody will answer, oh, well, there's only a few thousand left on a reservation.
Actually, that's really what's happening in Israel. I mean, much clearer in Israel. We at least go under the pretense of letting them have their own land and their own government. International law is very clear that an occupying country may not be instrumental in changing the structure of government of the country it occupies. The government of Iraq is now absolutely illegal under international law, and that's because the United States Congress authorized it to happen. The Congress of the United States and every one of those members of the Congress are war criminals. And it's not Bush, it's not Obama, it's not the earlier Bush or Clinton. It's the Congress that gives the directions. The commander-in-chief just carries them out. And we really step back, look at what we're doing in Afghanistan.
But I think you could go even one step further and not say that, well, it's not necessarily the Congress per se, but it's the plutocratic oligarchy which is behind the Congress. In order to be elected to the Congress, most people find that they have to be millionaires or part of this ruling oligarchy that controls America. And so that's the group that's really doing it. They control the Congress.
On the other hand, the theory of socialism that I'm a part of, the group that I'm part of, says that when the people step back and look carefully at what is happening, we have the power to change it. And one of the pains for me is that I feel responsible for what the Congress is doing. That's what drives me. That's what drove me during Vietnam. That's what drove me during Korea. I personally, even though I'm only one vote, I fail to get people to step back and look at what we're doing. And it brings me the greatest pain that I can't change the world. Well, of course I can. I'm only one person. It takes the whole of the working class. The working people of the United States have to step back and look at it. And when we do, the oligarchy will no longer be able to control us. No longer. And I think that's part of my role. And that's one of the reasons I feel really good. You know, this is my 20th time on the statewide ballot. For a number of offices, I'm now on the ballot for the first time as Socialist Party candidate. And it's a Socialist Party candidate that stands for a democratic revolution from below. Not that we elect people who are going to bring socialism, because they can't. I mean, once they start taking too much away from the capitalists, the capitalists will put up some other candidate and get rid of them. Or the APAC will do it. We don't need to have, I mean, that's part of the ruling oligarchy now. But we have the power. And
the problem is that we're not united. Some of the ordinary people are libertarians and some are...
Well, part of the problem is not looking at what motivates us, our economic system. I take the view that socialism is not an option. If we are to save the planet for humanity, socialism is an imperative. We can no longer allow greed to be the motivating force for production and distribution. We can no longer allow it in any setting, even in schools. In schools, I believe that when tests are administered, students should be able to sit around and work out the problems together. We need to start working cooperatively, not competitively. And it needs to happen at every level. And we need, speaking of stepping back, we live in a country where people go to school and work, many of them, an 8-hour day. And in public schools, they don't get paid for their work. Every economist from the far left to the far right, I don't care whether it's Adam Smith or whether it's Karl Marx, it will someplace in their writings say the level of education of a society is part of the measure of its wealth. That means when a youngster goes to school and learns that 2 and 2 is 4, that youngster has made a contribution to the wealth of the society, and we don't pay them. People should be paid to go to school.
They were in the old Soviet Union.
They were in Iraq,
Yeah.
right? And Iraq, women had equality with men. Not anymore, not since we got there. Right? Women, we had doctors all over the United States in training from Iraq. They had the best medical system in the Arab world. Not anymore. Now it's one of the worst.
But I wonder if people can imagine, instead of having to save and go into debt to go to college, you could go to university in Iraq or the Soviet Union and receive a salary for being a student.
Yeah.
And of course, your studies were free.
It's interesting that we put those two together because both of them are Stalinist states. Not so that we got to look at the bad side of all of that as well as the good side. And as a socialist, I talk about not having a dictatorship, but having a democratic society, and allowing for multiplicity of political parties. But socialism means, and I'm not talking about the little bookstore owner in your neighborhood or the man or woman who's a carpenter or has their own plumbing business. That's not what I mean by capitalism. I'm talking about corporate capitalism where the ownership is totally separate from the workers, and the only role that the ownership plays is trying to extract as much profit out of the labor of the people who work for that corporation. That has got to stop. We can no longer afford corporate capitalism. And I took that to the banking business back in 2008. I wrote a piece for Socialist, and I think I sent a letter to the editor, one of the newspapers in the statewide papers. We shouldn't have bailed them out. We should have dissolved the Federal Reserve System. I mean, Dennis Lane and I probably agree on that one. We may disagree on a lot of other things, but that's probably one we agree on. Dissolve the Federal Reserve System, restore the monetary production or production of money to the United States government, not private enterprise, and have one national bank. I'm willing to go and say you could even have 50 state banks as well, but every bank in the United States, other than those that are run by the government, those few that would be run by the government, or maybe just one, would be credit unions. We won't allow private ownership of the banking industry, and we should have let the whole thing collapse. We'd have, instead of being trillions of dollars in debt and getting deeper and deeper and deeper in debt on those same CDOs and the rest of the crap that they're selling, we would have restored the banking system. We'd have a new monetary system that we control. And that's what socialism is about. Now, there are lots of brands of socialism, so that's the brand that I'm about. There are brands of socialism that say, no, we know better than everybody else and we'll make the decision. We don't believe in democracy until people have their heads straightened out. You know, vanguardism, it's sometimes called. There are those that believe that the governing force should be work on principles of democratic centralism. And even I can accept that one, but the other level is the one that bothers me. You know, are we not going to have a democracy, or are we going to have a vanguard system? And But I would make that concession even, if it would, I mean, if that was the only way to get there. It's not the way I want to go, but the problem is corporate capitalism.